Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's ANAT Micro Talk. It's great to see your faces, lots of familiar people and friends, and lots of new people as well. My name's Melissa DeLaney, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ANAT, the Australian Network for Art and Technology. My pronouns are she, her. Today I am beaming in from Wiradjuri country, where we're all experiencing the shift in seasons. I'd like to also acknowledge our First Nations guests that are in the micro talk today, and that First Nations people across this land as the first scientists, artists, and technologists. I encourage you to keep your camera on if you like, so we can see your face and that the speakers can make it a nice exchange. Keep your audio off, and that would be appreciated. We also have the chat open, so feel free to introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from and who you are in the chat. And we'll be posting information on the speakers in the chat as we go through the talk as well. I want to acknowledge that we're supported by Creative Australia and also by Create SA, and also the other people and partners that have made this year's projects possible. The University of Newcastle are the supporter of ANAT Synapse this year, and FB Ideas in Kate Spencer is our guest from FB Ideas with the ANAT Bespoke project with Yandell, and also Southeast Water is a key partner in that project. With their support, these beautiful and important projects can continue to happen. We have some people behind the scenes, so I'd like to thank Mukastri, who's driving the back end of this program, Jen Brazier, ANAT's Program Manager, Carolyn Kavanagh, ANAT's Marketing and Communications Manager, and Pix, our Tech Officer. So thank you to all of you for supporting this project. I'll pass over to each individual guest here today, and they can introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into the question time. James, over to you.
Yeah. Hi everyone. My name's James Nguyen. I'm an artist and I sometimes write, and I'm currently now in on like Eora land because I'm just moving through between Newcastle and Melbourne. I'm in my auntie's house at the moment. And yeah, excited to kind of like have this conversation with everyone.
Thanks, James. John.
Hello, my name is Dr. John Gould from the University of Newcastle. I'm currently on Worimi country up here in the beautiful Port Stephens. Um, and I guess I'm a frogger. That's what I do. That's my entire life. So I've been out with James over the past 2 weeks, helping him to find some bell frogs, which will be a key part of his project.
Thank you. Kate from FB Ideas.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. My name is Kate Spencer. My pronouns are she, her. I am the general manager of FB Ideas, which is an organisation that's was set up by state government to support interdisciplinary and cross-sector collaboration in an area called Fisherman's Bend, which I should acknowledge that I'm coming to you from what we call Fisherman's Bend, but it is Bunurong country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about this topic of collaboration across sectors, which is so crucial to places like Fisherman's Bend. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Yandell.
Hi, I'm Yandell Walton. I'm coming to you from my studio in Collingwood, which is on Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, Naarm. My pronouns are she, they, and I work with multimedia installation, kind of creating immersive works that speak to the climate crisis. And I work a lot collaboratively and in an experimental way.
Great. Thank you so much, Yandell. I think we'll start with you while we have the focus there. It's interesting as well how the different projects that we're spotlighting today also have a broad focus on water and ecosystems. And Yandell mentioned climate. John and James have been looking at the frog population around the areas that John lives in as part of his research as well. And Yandell's been working with the subject of water, with Southeast Water and Fisherman's Bend being those partners. So Yandell, tell us about that experience and also what are some of those challenges that you've experienced working across 3 different partners and a precinct that's in development very much in Melbourne as well, that will be a crucial future precinct. But you have your foot on the ground very early days in terms of what's happening there.
Yeah, cool. So the Re-cultivate residency in partnership with Southeast Water enabled me to kind of explore or work with ways of incorporating water data within my practice. I often, when given the opportunity like this, these amazing opportunities to dive deep into research and development through a residency like this, I'll try and kind of use that opportunity to work with new technology that I haven't worked with before, different people, to expand my practice. So that's kind of what I did with this. So the experiment started fairly basic, bringing in water data like just kind of recorded tidal or rain data into Touch Designer just to create really simple visualizations. And then I worked with a few other of my collaborators to bring this data into more complex compositions in Unreal Engine to affect like the level or flow of the water within these virtual landscapes. Yeah, so that's kind of what I looked at in terms of this specific residency. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Kate, from your perspective as a supporter of this project, what are the key benefits for you as an organization to be working in residence with artists? And I say that as well because you work a lot with artists at FB Ideas and innovators and creators and entrepreneurs. But this was also Southeast Water's first time ever working with an artist. So you and I navigated those relationships early in the days to bring to them as partners what some of the value is for them to work with an artist in residence.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, we have worked with other artists and brokered other collaborations between artists and industry partners. But what I think is really exciting about this residency, but also kind of a bit of a challenge, is it gave Yandell 3 months to explore and play without a pre-described endpoint, but it also meant that in finding a relevant industry partner, we had to get someone on board who was comfortable with that undefined journey and to participate with us in that exploratory way. And I think there was some challenges with that, but I think we all worked together really well because it was founded on an ethos of collaboration rather than it's a project, it has an endpoint, and this is what we're working to. And I just think it's really beautiful that when I talk to our partners at Southeast Water, they say, gosh, working with Yandell has made us see water and water data in a whole new lens. For them, they do incredible work, very creative, innovative work, but their approach is perhaps through the lens of numbers, whereas Yandell has brought a whole new perspective on their work that I think is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is challenging for people to understand process-driven experimental collaboration. And in science, John, we'll go over to you. Your work is, even though it's experimental and there's a lot of research and kind of play in that artistic sense in the work you do in laboratories and in your research areas. It's still very outcome driven. You have to have outputs. And so I'd like to hear more from you about your experience working with John. And it's really just started for you two because you had to wait for the mating season as well to start.
Yeah. Did you want me to speak? Was it Lisa? Sorry.
John could, if John could
John? Yeah.
respond, first of all, from his
Yeah, sure.
perspective as the science partner.
Yeah. So absolutely correct. I guess when working with animals, you're really kind of restricted in when you can start to explore and to play. So our main species focus is the bell frog, which is a threatened species in New South Wales. And its breeding season pretty much the summer period. So we've had to wait until now during our main survey round for James to come out and to engage and explore with how we survey and how we try to find these frogs in the landscape that we're working in. So you really do have to be quite flexible and adaptable because the frogs aren't waiting for you. You have to wait for the frogs to start calling, to start breeding. So it's really just, I guess, this fluid interaction between you and your target species. And so we just go out every night and we hope to find our species, and sometimes we don't. And that's totally fine because there's a lot of co-occurring frogs that we're able to see, and they're just as beautiful. Maybe not as threatened, but still very important for the landscape and for the wetlands that we're working in. So yeah, it's a nice process, but you do have to be on your feet and up late and very willing to just take as much time as you need to find these little creatures.
And we've talked before, yourself and James and Jen, about that humans and how that the dominance or how we often engage with other species as through the lens of dominance. And so you all have been collaborating and working with frogs, and you have to relinquish control as humans and really engage in an interspecies communication and way. James, tell us a little bit about your experience in the field now and some of the things you've been doing recently as part of the residency.
Yep. So yeah, because of the seasonal implications of and access to kind of like the frogs, like I've been exploiting like my auntie and her friends. So yeah, so thinking through the idea of communities, I think is really important for my practice. And so the past few months, I've been going up and down in Sydney and kind of like talking with my auntie, and just the realization that even in a lot of immigrant communities, like there is a strong interest in kind of like the creatures that exist around you. And so she has like a little bucket type basin, washing basin in the back of her garden. And John helped me to kind of like determine what tadpoles were in there. And so it's kind of this thing where you don't need to have a university degree, or you don't need to have to be an artist to be kind of like interested in landscapes. So you know, she lives in the suburbs and she's got access to kind of like these animals that come and go. And the other few weeks, you might have seen the video, but I took my auntie and her friends out to Parramatta River because that's one of the subject matters that we're interested in, because it has a lot of toxins in it. And while we were there, I told her that just downriver in Homebush Bay, like the frogs are actually surviving because of the toxins that are controlling the fungal disease they're all suffering. And then because of that prompt, they're like, oh, yes, we have lots of songs on frogs. And then they started singing these funny frog songs. Yeah, so kind of like thinking through how lots of different communities actually are interested in animals and the ecosystem, but they think about it and they approach it in very different ways. And just being out in the field with John and the volunteers and the researchers have been incredible. It's been so fun. I've never been so immersed in an environment. Like when you go bushwalking, I'm always thinking about what kind of food am I going to have next. But when you're frogging from say 8 to midnight or 1 p.m., like, and you're inside the swamp, there's a lot of like this wonderful sense of trust and care, not only for the environment and the animals that are there, but for the people that are there with you. You're part of a wonderful team, and people are constantly kind of like exchanging information, and it's also very embedded. And it's also this kind of like practice of being in the environment and listening and experience the environment with your entire body.
Mm.
Be it by calling and singing, almost like my auntie and her friends as well. And, enjoying yourself while you're still kind of like doing really serious work. I think it's been an incredible, immersion, I think.
Yeah, I loved that part of the video when the aunties were singing and then birds were singing, call it the birds and the aunties together. That was really beautiful. And it is serious subject matter. And I think both of the projects, and Yandell made the point about the climate emergency and the work that's happening. And both of your works are really also centered in that. You're reading the environments that you're working in, you're listening to the environments, you're projecting futures into those environments as well. Yandell, I'm interested in the role of an artist in these type of projects and how you see yourself and your role as an artist in the work that you're doing.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. I suppose with this project, there was, this inspiration through the Southeast Water Partnership and the recycling plant that's planned for that area, obviously, that is will be totally, needed. But then, if in terms of my broader practice, really looking at moving, like creating work that moves away from anthropocentric viewpoints, giving sort of shared agency to humans, non-humans, and the machine technology. And I think, yeah, then creating these immersive spaces. I often create very, very immersive spaces that are quite embodied, that are really powerful. So I feel like uh, as an artist, I can connect in a really different way. So, you know, still having all of this depth and knowledge, but delivering it in a very different way. So hopefully the audience feels something quite emotional that they can connect in a really different and deep way that will hopefully end up inspiring change. That's my hope.
And we also talked with this project, I think you had short-time access to a warehouse space down in Fisherman's Bend precinct. So this is a process-driven experimental residency. But yourself and Kate have already been talking about how this articulates into public spaces and audience engagement projects and installations and exhibitions as well.
Yeah, definitely. I was really excited to visit the site that is going to be that recycled water plant. It's at the moment just abandoned warehouses, which is absolutely my favorite thing in the world. So that was really exciting to go and see those spaces and again, respond very intuitively with, technology to document these spaces and create these kind of visualizations that, can test these data sets. So I just kind of used all of that as a testing platform, but then could definitely envisage these amazing installations in these spaces. So I've been talking to Kate. We'll see what happens. But I mean, these sort of projects are such a small part of such a larger, for me, such a larger program. I've, yeah, I'm still in development of a major project that started with a residency similar to this in 2022 with ANAT, 2021, 2022, I can't remember, so it's this ongoing, and even this project fed into that project.
I love that.
Yeah.
You also worked on Gari in Queensland on Gubbi Gubbi country as not part of this project, but you were also feeding the work you were doing on country there
Yes. Yeah.
into this project as well.
Yeah, it all feeds into each other. So I was using that time to think about water in a really different way through the ecologists and scientists, and yeah, cultural consultations that were happening during that field trip. Um, Also, the technology that they were teaching me there as well. Then I could bring that back into this project back in Melbourne. So it is all definitely connected.
And they are just starting points, the residencies that ANAT does. 3 months is such a short time. Kate, I want to hear more about what is Fisherman's Bend.
Yes, for those that don't know, Fisherman's Bend is a place in Melbourne, and I think it's a very industrial place. So it has a long history where Holden Manufacturing was based for many years. It's on the Birrarung, but it's also the part of the Birrarung that changed its course due to the growth of Melbourne in the 1800s. You look across a very industrial. It's more than a site. It's a huge area. You see the infrastructure of the ports in the distance. Very large factories. So I think it's actually a beautiful place for Yandell to think about kind of water and futures, because there is water around. There's enormous water infrastructure under your feet that most people don't see. There are future plans like water recycling, but also future development plans. So it's this, it's a lots of empty warehouses, lots of industrial sites that will need some transformation, as well as blank sites where other things will grow. So I think it's very fertile ground to imagine creatively what is the future, and to bring those provocations about, well, what is the future that we want, through Yandell's work.
Yeah. And when we spoke with Martin, one of the Southeast Water collaborators, his role in this whole project is also water security in the future of access to clean water and urban futures. And so Fisherman's Bend has this really huge urban footprint as a residential business innovation precinct up to the 2050, 2080 and beyond. And this is the kind of work that Martin and his team at Southeast Water have been doing. So it's really important that artists are part of those crucial questions, and that's what Martin's feedback to me was, that Yandell was bringing this different lens to this water future and what happens in those urban spaces. James, back to you of those urban spaces and the waterways you've been working with. And some of your work started off as a kind of ancestral and historic provocation to bring you to this point in time.
Yeah. So for a little bit of context, like I think since 2016, I've just been doing research on Agent Orange, which is like a herbicide made out of a combination of like dioxins and troxins. And I found out from one of my exes actually that there's Agent Orange and dioxin contamination in Parramatta River. And because it's an estuary, instead of the chemicals actually flushing out into the ocean and becoming more diluted, whatever leaches from the buried material from the site that ends up in the water keeps flushing back every time the tide comes in. And so more and more of the leachates and the dioxins actually accumulate up the food chain and up further tributaries like Duck River. And the irony is that like the places that are most contaminated are where a lot of Southeast Asian refugees and immigrants after the war in Vietnam had resettled to. So places like Fairfield, Bankstown, Silverwater, Parramatta, all of that kind of like Western Sydney catchment. And people still kind of like practice their kind of like fishing. You know, it's where people have leisure and they still eat and they still hunt for like oysters and crustaceans there. And yeah, and so like the idea that my family farm in Vietnam was sprayed with Agent Orange, and Australia was the country that was this one of the primary sources of that production of Agent Orange. And now we're very far from that war. We're 50 years on from that war, and we're in another continent, but we're still haunted by the same kind of like chemical traces that are being left behind due to industrial and economic processes. And yeah, and so kind of like thinking through, despite these environmental compromises and despite these kind of like horrific histories and narratives of like different forms of colonization and war and conflict, like people still survive, like people still thrive and enjoy living by the river. They still maintain culture. They still try to sing. They still, one of my auntie's friends actually still makes fish sauce in a pot in the back of her garden. And sometimes I'm like, where did the fish come from? And I'm like, yeah. And so kind of like for me, I think about forms of resilience and hope and knowing histories, because a lot of these histories, especially in Australia, they're forgotten because we always see ourselves as kind of like separate from diabolical wars. Like wars they're always presented as overseas. We don't really see kind of like the wars to, and the genocide of Aboriginal people as a war that happened here and continues to happen here. We don't ever see that like our roles in wars are major. So one of the terrible kind of like horrifying things is that Australia was the country that drafted the UN resolution for chemical weapons in war, but it was one of the countries that produced the most chemical weapons for Americans to use. And history seems to repeat itself in kind of like this thinking that we're kind of like washed our hands from violence elsewhere, like, oh, we're only producing these chemicals. We don't have any, like, morally we're not corrupt because we're just making vats of chemicals however people choose to use these chemicals. That's not on us. And it kind of like keeps going over and over again, even now when you think about how earlier in the year Penny Wong was saying that Australia only produces non-lethal weapons. Like in the past, Australia presented its manufacturing of Agent Orange as, oh, it's a non-lethal chemical, it's an agricultural product, but if you choose to use it on like rainforests in Vietnam, that's your choice. It's a product. And again with the idea of like coal and extractive kind of like opportunities that we have in Australia, we're seen as kind of like a supplier, but then we don't really deal with the repercussions of what we produce. And And I think those histories need to be in people's heads so that they can kind of like see these reverberations kind of like happening and going around in cycles. And I think as a nation, for us to kind of really deal with kind of like racism, colonization, all of these things, we have to kind of like bring so many different communities into these conversations about extraction and care for, you know, the homes that we share with like other creatures, and, you know, and for, you know, like more hopeful futures. And these frogs that kind of like cling on to kind of like these swamps and marshlands, they're an incredibly hopeful and beautiful, gorgeous kind of like inspiration for how we could survive and live as well, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And it's through different ways of listening and communicating, and you've both been doing that, or you all have been doing this in your projects. Yandell, through the data, that's real-time data that's coming through. So listening to what the water has been telling you in informing your work, and then also visualizing and articulating what that looks like via technology and in future scapes that you're creating as well. And then John and James, the work that you've been doing in listening, the frogs are telling you the story, they're guiding you. They're the species, but also the kind of biosphere that you've been working in, communicating with the frogs and creating these different points of language then as humans to communicate that to your communities in different ways, and then how we adjust to these worlds of which we are part and that we're making together. Yeah. Yandell, I'm interested. You started off working, I've been to your studio, and you're originally from, you grew up in the North Australia around Cairns or Townsville, I think, or somewhere around rainforest country.
Yeah, I was originally from Melbourne, but I grew up a lot in far north Queensland. On my dad lived up over the Daintree on Kukuyilunji country, so that's the Daintree rainforest, like fully in the forest. It was beautiful. So I was really lucky to have the best of both worlds, really. Really kind of connected to that forest ecosystem, but also having these experiences in inner city Melbourne, which obviously drew me to uh, art and culture and wanting to become an artist. So yeah, that was kind of the yeah, mix.
And I see that influence in your work. And I mentioned your studio because it's absolutely full of plants. It's something that you
Yeah.
tend to, and you are this person in this place that there are just plants everywhere in this in studio environment where you're working really deep in technology, you're within systems, but you've also creating these natural urban environments around you as you work as well.
Yeah, and I feel like all of this new work that I'm doing is really, yeah, trying to, yeah, bring in a shared agency with all of those things. Um, and water's just part of that. Well, that water data is hopefully one of those things. So
We've got about 7 minutes left, and a question that came up at ANAT Spectra recently, and Yandell's work was in the exhibition of the gallery at the University of Sunshine Coast Gallery as part of that exhibition and an event. When we had our conversation series at Spectra, a lot of artists and people that are in this Zoom event today work across different species, and we talked about the problematic idea of collaborating in interspecies way. And are we really collaborating? Because who's giving voice and agency to these other areas that we're working with? So, for example, you're working with frogs, James and John, Kate and Yandell, you've been talking about working with data and water and listening and working within different ecosystems. Are we really collaborating? Or are we bringing that colonial mindset into the work we're doing and thinking we know? John, I want to talk to you because you've been working deeply with frogs for all of your career. How do you see that work?
It is a bit of a struggle because you're working with an animal that doesn't have a voice, so to speak. And so you really do have to be a steward and think about what's best for the species that you're working on. So it's all about minimizing disturbance, improving their lives and the chance for their survival into the future. And so I think you do really have to put yourself in the mindset of a frog and what's best for the frog. And sometimes what's best for the frog isn't always what's best for you. A lot of ecologists love to take photos, and sometimes taking photos can disturb the frog. And so sometimes you got to think, well, maybe I should just avoid taking the photo and let the frog just be. So it's really all about, I guess, compassion for these species that don't have a voice, and that's the best way um, to conserve these species, really.
Yeah, thank you. James, what's your view on that kind of work?
I think yeah, John's word of compassion is really important because it's just essentially like if we're able to all practice compassion to each other and then compassion to kind of like the creatures that are struggling and also the creatures that fuel our lives in so many different ways and the landscapes that create that, then you know like you kind of like become slightly better humans. So maybe it's not a practice of, I don't know, like trying to be equal with nature, which kind of like the idea of collaboration introduces. But you know that the term collaboration in itself is problematic because it is kind of like comes from a war term of betrayal, where you collaborate with your enemy to kind of like you know, kill your neighbors so that you survive. But yeah, and so for me, I think yeah, maybe thinking through like these ways of sitting and listening and trying to empathize and kind of like think beyond your needs. Sometimes it might end up like with terrifying consequences, you know, like it happens, you know, like a lot of governments have introduced things like the GAM mosquito fish that I learned on this, you know, like project where they were like, oh, we need to get rid of mosquitoes in Australia. Let's throw in these like cute little fish. And now these fish have kind of like completely decimated tadpole populations. And so sometimes when you think that you're doing the best, it's actually not the best. But if you don't think that you're not doing the best and if you're not trying to kind of like practice this sense of empathy and care, then you might as well just nuke the whole place, you know, and that's and I think that's a much, much worse option.
That is a much, much worse option. I'm sure we all agree. I think that the important part of these projects are that we're supporting artists in the development of their practice to explore these really vital and important and relevant themes broadly to the research communities, but also to all communities and that those intersections. And I'm saying this because I've been reading a lot of recent releasing of cultural policies. Creative Victoria released their plan last week. And as I'm reading through, I'm trying to find where the artists are in it. I'm trying to find where the artists fit in all of these plans. So I just want to do a quick buzz around the room and get from you all just a quick snapshot of the role of the artists going forward. Yandell, over to you.
The role of the artist, um, tackling these big issues in really inspiring ways that can connect.
Thank you. Kate, what's the role of the artist?
I think echoing Yandell's words, to give a new lens, to give a totally new perspective to, I think it was James who mentioned before, we all come to these problems or these themes from a different perspective, and every perspective is helpful. And I think an artist's view is just so incredibly unique that it's essential.
Thank you. John, what is the role of the artist?
think it's to help us relate things that we didn't think about previously. So for us, it helps us relate to the species that are really being impacted by our actions, and I think that's the biggest role of the artist.
Beautiful, thank you. James, what is the role
Um,
of the artist?
I'm not sure. Like maybe it's better that we don't get written into cultural or government policies because it actually gives us more freedom to kind of like mess around and work in the in-betweens. Because the moment government gives you what your defined roles and functions are, it kind of like shuts down how we can all think. I think that's just my annoying thing. Sorry.
I like the idea of a 100-year project. It came up with something that I was talking with at the Asia Link group last week in Sydney. The idea of beyond arts funding cycles and looking at the next 100 years as a project and beyond. So I'm going to leave it there. And I think the role of the artist is what we're making together in the next 100 years and beyond. So thank you everybody for coming today. It's been so great to hear about all of your work and your projects, and I appreciate your time, and thank you for being part of ANAT 2025. And thank you to everybody for coming and joining us in your lunch times. It's great to see you all here, and no doubt our paths will cross again. So thank you again for joining in the ANAT 2025 Micro Talk. Thank you to Yandell, Walton, Kate from Fisherman's Bend, Kate Stevens, and John Gould and James Nguyen. Thank you.